My name is Benton Stokes. I'm a former fundamentalist, post-evangelical worship leader, and songwriter. I enjoy wry Manhattans, roller coasters, and road trips, just not all at the same time.
I'm Elaine O'Rourke, and I'm a teacher, an author, and a spiritual coach. I was a philosophy professor and a liberal pastor in a couple of former lives, and these days I love aha moments and not-so-dry martinis.
We have conversations about life and God with a queer perspective, over cocktails, like you. This is Cocktail Theology.
This is not a martini.
It's not?
No.
Okay.
I know it's called a martini.
Uh-huh.
And we're serving it in a coupe glass, which
We are.
would incline one to believe it was a martini. However, this is an espresso martini.
Okay.
And once you put the word espresso in there, it is no longer a martini.
Okay.
All right.
All right,
here
fair
we go.
enough. Fair enough.
Not bad. Yeah, so it's just the decaf coffee liqueur that we made,
Yes.
and decaf espresso,
Yeah.
and vodka.
Okay.
I think it might be good with like something with some more unctuousness, like cream or something. Or
That's what I feel like I'm missing,
Right?
is that creamy bit.
yeah, well, it's probably because you take cream in your coffee.
It's true. I
Right?
do. Yeah.
And so maybe this
That
is
is
just wrong.
probably exactly why. That and everybody that I ever see drinking a quote-unquote espresso martini in a restaurant, it looks like chocolate milk
Oh yeah, I bet that's
in a martini
true.
glass. Yep.
Yeah, well, this is not that. But it's tasty. Mm-hmm. I think it would make a really good breakfast cocktail. I'm sorry. What?
Very brunchy.
Very brunchy.
I agree.
So I was thinking, now that we've headed into winter, we've been trying to take little trips wherever we could.
Yeah.
And we had thought about going to Houston just to go to the Rothko Chapel.
Yeah.
And you've never been there.
I haven't.
And it's been closed because of flooding at some point. And for those of you who don't know what the Rothko Chapel is, it is I want to say octagonal, large room with a very large painting by Mark Rothko on each wall.
Okay.
And then there are little meditation seats and chairs and such. So you can just come and sit in there, and quiet is encouraged.
Yeah.
But there's nothing else in there that screams chapel.
Okay.
Like if you think of chapel as being a tiny, tiny church or something,
Right.
there's no other symbolism in there. It's just the Rothkos and the ability to sit quietly in one way or another.
Okay.
It is one of the most spiritual places I've ever been.
Wow.
I love it. Love it. And it got me thinking, well, what makes it spiritual? Like,
Yeah.
why would abstract paintings by Mark Rothko engender a spiritual experience for not just me, but obviously other people as well? Who determines what is spiritual and what that means?
Wow, yeah. Who knows what Rothko was thinking as he was creating these works of art?
And does it matter?
That's a fine question.
Let's start with what spiritual means first. Okay. When I say spiritual, and you can have a completely different definition, that's fine. When I say spiritual, I am thinking about something that causes a combination of awe and quiet in you, and that touches that eternity and that liveliness within one.
Yeah.
Because I can feel very spiritual without thinking actively of God or any other avatar, if you will.
Right.
I think there has to be an awe feeling kind of deep in you. And I think there needs to be this little quiet spot, even if you're dancing wildly. There has to be this little quiet spot. And it has to be reaching either so deeply into your liveliness or so far into eternity that you feel connected in some way.
Yeah.
Does that work for you?
Yeah, I was going to say that if something resonates with my spirit, I think what it does to me is that it gives me a sense of you said awe, which I love, but it gives me a sense of there's something so much more mysterious and more awesome than me. And rather than making that, like, make me feel small, it actually makes me feel bigger, because I feel like that presence is inside me too.
Oh,
and so if there's something that reminds me of that or pulls me into that, and it's not like necessarily even a cognitive realization, it's just like your spirit just leaps, like your soul just goes, whoa.
Yeah.
And there's something very satisfying about that in a big, broad sense.
I wish our listeners could see you trying to gesture with your hands and make sense out of it. I mean, that's what I'm doing too, is like little tiny deep inside you, big.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's go with that. So, are all intentionally religious works spiritual? Thinking about artworks, writing, poetry, painting, music, whatever.
I would have to say probably no. I mean, back in the summer, I was in Madrid, and we visited a really famous museum called the Prado. And it has a lot of religious Renaissance art, even medieval art. I mean, it's one of the world's great stashes of religious art.
Right.
And it's beautiful.
Yep.
I walked through for a couple of hours looking at different art pieces. From a personal standpoint, I don't think any of them made me feel the way we're talking about.
Okay.
I admired their construction. I admired their beauty, their color, their, and the history around them was fascinating to me.
Okay.
But so many of the painters of that day, and also so many of the musicians of that day, were basically hired by the church to create art for the church.
Yes.
Mozart was one of those. And we know Mozart's life was not exactly an upstanding Christian life, right? That's just not who he was. And yet the church was able to hire him, and some of his great works actually are religious, but I wouldn't say that he wrote them from a place of connection to God. I mean, who knows? Who would ever know the mind of Mozart or the soul of Mozart? But I would say he was doing a lot of what he was doing for a paycheck.
Sure. Well, Michelangelo is a perfect example of this, right? You've got the Sistine Chapel ceiling, which is one of the great works of Western art.
Yeah.
Depicts all kinds of religious themes. We know that Michelangelo was not religious. That's very clear from histories of the time.
Yeah.
And he was paid to do this.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go with that for a second. So if Mozart and Michelangelo were getting paid by the church to do works on religious themes, but they themselves were not... See, I can't judge whether they were spiritual.
Right.
But I can judge that they weren't religious.
Right. Okay.
Right. So they weren't practicing something.
Yeah.
Okay. So if they went into it for the paycheck, could it come out as spiritual in your mind?
Yes.
Okay. So say more about that.
I used to write songs and get a paycheck for writing songs for the Christian market. Was every song I wrote given to me by God? Of course not. But were there songs that I wrote that struck something deep in me or expressed something very real for me? Absolutely yes.
Okay.
Now, I would say that I am and have been a spiritual person basically my whole life.
Right.
Even though maybe my motivation for getting up that morning and going to a writing appointment and writing a song was to get paid, something spiritual could come from that experience.
Okay, there's so much interesting in that. Do you mind if I tear it apart a little bit?
Please, yeah.
Just because I'm trying to get it what it means, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. So you are a spiritual person, and in these songs, you were often writing from a spiritual place about a religious usually religious, actually, religious idea.
Yes.
That fair?
Yeah.
Okay. If you were writing from a spiritual place about a religious idea, does that mean that the song then is spiritual?
From my point of view as the creator, I would say yes.
Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that listeners would experience it that way.
Okay. So if I listen to one of those songs, I'm in the kind of mood where I can be moved to whatever, and I don't hear it as spiritual. What's the disconnect?
Well, sometimes the disconnect may be that you just don't understand my frame of reference. So if I'm writing a song that feels, very deep and spiritual to me, but I'm using language that doesn't ring true for you or isn't language you're familiar with, then it might not resonate from a cognitive point of view. You might just not get it, or you may hear it as something else.
Okay.
So I think that's one place. I think another place may be that you just don't see the world the same way.
Okay.
And your experience of the world isn't the same.
Okay.
Or your experience of God hasn't been the same.
Okay.
I may be expressing this, you may be hearing that.
Okay. So the spiritualness, if you will, isn't in your intent or in the structure, sound, etc. of the song itself. It's something about the meeting of my experience, state of mind, whatever, and the song, kind of separate from you in a certain way, right?
Yeah.
That makes it spiritual.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I would also say that if it were you and I, because you know me,
Right.
then even though if the words or the actual what's happening doesn't resonate because you know me and you know that it resonated with me, then you might recognize the spiritual value, whatever that means, to what I created.
But I might not experience it as spiritual for me.
Right.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that is interesting. Right.
Okay. So going back to the Rothko Chapel for just a minute.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about Rothko's religious life at all. I feel confident that there are many people I could take in there who would be like, eh.
Oh, right.
And they might be very deeply spiritual people, but they wouldn't get that sense of awe and quiet and bigness themselves.
Right.
Okay. So I'm going to assume for the moment that Rothko's intent was not to convey spirituality per se.
Okay.
So Rothko was painting whatever he was painting, and I believe that many, if not all of his paintings came from something deep in his gut.
Yeah.
So there was no intentional spiritual content in it, if you will.
Right.
Okay. Like it doesn't have a religious theme. I mean, we're talking boxes, right? And then so some people come into that space and they experience it as spiritual. They have a spiritual experience or they don't.
Yeah.
Now, here's the question.
Okay.
One of the things I'm wondering about is if I saw those Rothkos in a museum, if I would have the same experience. Right?
Yeah.
Like coming into a space that just has those, where you're supposed to be quiet and you're supposed to spend time sitting and just being. That, for me, automatically, like, it's almost Pavlovian. I automatically go to a place where I might be moved by the spirituality of something.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
The way some people might feel that way when they go into a fancy church or,
Sure.
The woods.
Right.
Okay, so there's something about the person experiencing it, plus the thing, whatever the thing is, maybe the intention, maybe the location.
The environment, yeah.
The environment. When I was 19 and I was on trains and backpacking alone through Europe, I went to all the great cathedrals. Did not appreciate the great cathedrals. Appreciated the art, but the excess bothered me.
Yeah.
So even separate from that, though, there's like, if you go into a great cathedral, you can feel whether it's living or not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It is the strangest thing. And it isn't about whether there are worship services there or not. It's about whether the spirit of the people and the spirit of God are active
Are there
in it.
Yeah.
Right? When I went to the Vatican, first of all, at that point you could actually get into the square around the Vatican easily. But there were homeless people, Roma, all kinds of people begging around the thing. And then there's the Vatican with, if they sold a candlestick, they could feed everybody there.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
I found it extremely upsetting.
Yeah.
So the whole time walking through St. Peter's, I was just really upset. They also had a great art gallery. So I went to the art gallery. There's Chagall, the Jew, painting whatever he's painting. And there I felt spiritual.
Yeah.
What the heck is that?
Right. Yeah, I think we are just fearfully and wonderfully made. I think we are each so unique, and the things that resonate with us are all unique to us. You know? I mean, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I get that. And like you mentioned, the woods or, hiking or things like that. And people will talk about how they have these deep spiritual experiences in nature. That's like their church. Other people, I might go through there and be like, oh, well, that's really pretty, that, that patch of flowers. And then they just are like weeping because the flowers mean so much to them.
Yes.
So it's just like, I think spiritual is just a really hard term to nail down because everybody's spirit is different. Now, God's spirit is God's spirit. And as we talk about, our spirit is sort of like a little bit of God's spirit in us. So it's sort of like our little thread, right?
Yeah.
A life force that comes from God. But for all of us, it's just different. I don't know.
Okay. So now let's go to the spiritual songs of the slaves and of writers and composers. I'm using the big scare quotes, like through the 18th, 19th century, because there is a genre called spiritual song.
Okay.
What do we do with that? Like, there's something written by spiritual people that really is trying to engage the spirit. Is it possible, and I don't know, our listeners may have to tell us, to come from that tradition and to not have had a terrible experience and not experience that as spiritual? Or is there something about the lingua franca of the common language of a particular faith tradition or a particular set of music? Tonality, for example, is a great one, right?
Right.
Is there something more spiritual about a minor chord than a major chord?
Well, I mean, film score writers who teach this kind of stuff would tell you that absolutely, if you want to evoke certain feelings, then you utilize certain chord progressions or certain chord voicings or to create moods. Like, people who do this for a living and in a movie, there's a moment that without the music wouldn't be very intense, but then you add the music and then all of a sudden it becomes this edge of your seat moment. Right. So there's a psychology to that.
Right.
As for a spirituality to that, I'm not sure.
Okay, so that's a great distinction. The difference between the psychology of it and the spirituality of it.
Yeah.
Because it's not necessarily about what you're thinking about or what your emotions are at the moment. Spirituality is something bigger.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't drive you deep and take you to eternity at the same moment, it's not spiritual.
It's not really spiritual, no.
Okay. All right. Okay. I want to think about a couple of books that people have told me they found very spiritual, moved them, got them back to God. One of them is The Shack.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you who don't know the book The Shack or the movie The Shack, short version, man's son is, I believe, kidnapped and murdered. Man is grieving. Goes out into the woods in the depth of his grief, finds a cabin, or a shack, goes into it, and has an experience with a version of the Trinity.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
I remember hearing people really talk about it deeply and having been moved by it. So I put off reading it because I knew that I wouldn't have the same response.
Yeah.
And then when I read it, I was like, okay, frankly, I have heard this story before. And the idea that God is a woman really doesn't change my way of thinking much.
Right.
So I didn't get that at all. However, I was moved by the man's having lost his son.
Sure, yeah.
And finding hope.
Yeah.
So that, to me, is more of a psychological, intellectual, or a feeling thing than it is a spiritual experience. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so. You were actually moved more by the human elements of the story.
Yes.
Than the mystical elements of the story.
Yes.
Right.
Good. I like when you use the word mystery earlier, I think that's an important piece.
I think so too.
There has to be something in there. Okay. All right. Can you think of something that you find spiritual, book, poem, art, whatever, that maybe others wouldn't?
Wow. I used to be, I don't know if this still rings true, but there was quite a long season in my life where I really enjoyed going to coffee shops and opening up my computer and writing, brainstorming, journaling, watching people, catching bits and pieces of conversations, and finding it fascinating, but also seeing bits of God in all the things. The song that's playing in the cafe, the color of the wall, or the taste of the coffee, or the just all the little bits and pieces in there just added up to something interesting and fascinating to me.
Right.
And every time it was different. Something else would captivate me. So I think that was one place where most people wouldn't find a coffee shop like that spiritual, but it was a place where I would go. My life was really, it was kind of hard, and there was just a lot going on. I didn't have a lot of time to myself. I didn't have a lot of money, but a coffee shop was a place that I could go and spend $5 and an hour and leave recharged somehow.
Okay. So you may not have had the awe experience, but it was something that recharged your spirit.
Yes, right. Which I think you can find those little bits of spirituality all around, right? In conversations with friends and things that you see, things you hear.
Right.
But the awe-inspiring thing, which I don't think this is an uncommon experience, but I love the redwoods. That is something that I was really taken aback by when I moved to California, is how much I love the redwoods.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond admiring the redwoods,
Right.
which I do. But there's just a sense of awe. And when I'm in a redwood grove and it's quiet, and I'm the only person staying there among these giant trees, it really engenders that feeling of I am small and the universe is huge and I don't understand it all, and that's really awesome. You know, it's like all of that at the same time.
Yeah.
Again, it's this going deep in with a sense of awe and a big connection to something so much grander.
Yeah.
And the redwoods give me that.
Sunsets often give me that. Sunrises, not so much. I love the sunrise, but it doesn't have that same thing for me.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting, though?
Yeah.
So I'd like to think of it this way, if I may. Feel free to say, no, Elaine, that's not a good way to think about it, because I'm totally open to this. The Spirit, God's Spirit, the eternal Spirit, however you want to frame that, is always around and moving. And there's something about what we term as spiritual that allows us to kind of not be aware of her, but experience her.
Yeah.
What do you think of that?
I like that.
Okay, and that's why things can be spiritual for me, but not for you. Because it's partly about my receptivity.
It is.
And whether whatever it is I'm experiencing, has that. And it's kind of like I was thinking about some of the spiritual practices I've done. Like one of the things I used to do was when I was on an airplane, I would give like a breath prayer for every single person who came in.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes it was just a thing I did. And every once in a while it would catch me. Right? There's no good reason for that.
Yeah.
So somehow the spirit that permeates all eternity, all creation, and who knows what else, and I had a moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go with that.
Yeah. And I think if we are receptive to that and are paying attention at all, we all have those moments.
Yes.
But we have to be attentive to it.
Right.
You have to kind of be willing to get outside yourself. Be willing to be a little more aware.
Right. And be comfortable with the idea that something actually isn't about you.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. All right, I feel good about that. I think that I am comfortable with that definition for now.
Okay.
All right.
I am too. Listeners, what do you think? We love hearing from you. Cocktailtheology.com is where we are. Let us know what you think about spirituality, where you find it, what resonates with your spirit, what makes your soul soar. We would love to hear about it. Till next time.
Bye.
Funny how the view can change, how life just seems to rearrange itself, no matter what it was. I don't know how it goes, but look, moving on feels pretty good. Moving on feels pretty good.
If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a like and hit subscribe wherever you're listening right now. We welcome your comments, questions, and ideas for conversations and for cocktails. Please get in touch with us at our website, cocktailtheology.com. Cocktail Theology is a production of SFS. Our theme song is Moving On Feels Pretty Good, recorded by yours truly, Benton Stokes. You can find my music wherever you stream your favorite artists. Join us next Thursday for another new episode.